Hello. So, as you can see, my video this week is going to be on Dune Imperium. I guess this game came out 6, 7 months ago, something like that. At the end of the year, when everybody was doing their, top 100s or top 20s, whatever they do, this game was on there a lot. So finally, a couple weeks ago, I saw, um, I think it was a sale on cool stuff, maybe. Anyway, I got it for a decent price, so I thought I would try it out since everybody ranted and raved about it. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to set up, play. We'll do a couple of example turns, and then I'll tell you my thoughts. Alright, first you set the game board in the play area between all the players. Then you'll take this figure called the mentat and put him here. You'll see the mentat space. Then you'll take these alliance tokens and put them in the proper space on this side of the board where they go with their alliance. So the one for the spacing guild goes here. This one's for the emperor, you'll see, and it goes here. This one is for the Fremen, it goes here. And this one's for the Bene Gesserit, and it goes here. Alright, next you're going to create a conflict deck. You'll separate these conflict cards into the 1, 2, and 3 decks. You'll shuffle up these 4 level 4 cards and place them in this space. Then you'll shuffle this deck of 10 level 2 or 2 conflict cards, and you'll deal 5 on top of your shuffled 4 level 3. I guess it's not really a level anyway, conflict deck 1, 2, and 3. So anyway, you're going to shuffle these 10 conflict deck 2 cards and put 5 of them on top of this these deck 3 cards, and the other 5 will go out of the game unseen. And finally, you'll shuffle these 4 deck 1 conflict cards and place 1 of them on top of the conflict 2 cards, and the other 3 will go out of the game unseen. So now you'll have a deck of 10 conflict cards, which they kind of act for a possible game end timer. Every round you'll turn one of those cards over, and at the round, if you get to the last card, once that round is finished, then that's one way for the game to end. Alright, next you'll shuffle up these intrigue cards and just place them near the board somewhere. Alright, next you'll shuffle this Imperium deck. It's a pretty big deck. And place it at the top of the board and deal 5 cards to form your Imperium row. Alright. Then next to your Imperium row, you'll put your reserve cards. You're going to have the Arrakis Liaison, the Spice Must, I guess I'm going to have to kind of sit these down here, the Spice Must Flow, and the Fold Space. So those are all the same cards, and you'll just have a deck for each one near the Imperium row cards. Then each player will choose a leader. The leader cards will have either a 1, 2, or 3 icons next to the name. The more icons next to the name, the more strategically complex it is to play the character. It's recommended for your first game to play characters with the just one icon next to the name. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to set up a 3-player game, and I'll choose characters all with just the level 1 icon there. I guess there's a new Dune movie that's been made. I don't think it's out yet, but the artwork, I guess, on this game is from that new Dune movie. I saw, the old one that had Sting and Patrick Stewart in it, many years ago when I was a younger lad, and then I think I remember in the early 2000s there was a sci-fi mini-series of Dune, which I saw. I've never read the books, so it's just those two movies that I've seen. But anyway, I guess there's a new movie that's about to come out, and the artwork is from that, as what I understand. It could be false, but I don't know. Anyway, each person's going to choose a leader. So for my 3 players, I've chosen Paul Atreides from House Atreides, Glossu the Beast Raban from House Harkonnen, and Earl Memnon Thorvald from House Thorvald. Anyway, those are my 3 characters that I've chosen. Then each player is going to start with the same 10 card starting deck. You can tell the starting cards because they have this little arrow, white arrow at the top next to the title of the card. So they're all the same. You get 2 convincing argument, 2 dagger, 2 Dune the Desert Planet, 1 reconnaissance, 1 seek allies, and 1 signet ring. So all players will start with that same deck. So each player will take that 10 card deck, shuffle it up, and put it next to their leader mat over here on this side. And each player will take 1 water token and put it in their play area. And then you'll create a supply of the other tokens. You got your spice tokens, your Solari tokens, that's kind of the money, spice, and then a supply of your water tokens, and you just put those next to the board. Then each player will choose a color and takes all the components of that color. First you'll take your 2 of your agents and put them on your leaderboard, and you'll take your 3rd agent and just put it up somewhere on this side of the board, and that's an agent you'll be able to get if you take the sword. He's your swordmaster. You'll get to add him to your leaderboard if you take this swordmaster action. Each player will have 2 of these discs. You'll take 1 of them and put it on the 0 space of the score track, which is here. If you're playing from 1 to 3 players, you'll put your score track on the 0 space. If you're playing a 4-player game, you'll put your scoring marker on the 1 space. You'll take your combat marker and place it on the 0 space of the combat track here, with the this sword side up. The other side is plus 20. If your score goes over 20, then you would flip it over, but everybody puts theirs on the 0 space of the combat track. And where's red's? There it is. Alright, and each player starts with 16 cubes, I think it is. You'll take 4 and place them on the bottom space of the influence tracks of each faction. So all the players will do that. Let me do that for my other 2 players. Alright, I got 1 cube for each player on the starting space of the influence tracks for each faction. The remaining 12 cubes will represent your troops. Each player will take 3 of them, 3 troops, and put them in one of these garrison circles that represent their garrison of troops, and you try to put it in the circle closest to your player. So we'll just say blue's gonna go there, green's gonna go there, and red will go over here. And then you just put the remaining components in your play area. Should have 3 control flags, an extra disc, your remaining cubes, and of course your starting water token. And that should set up for each player. So I've got the same for my green player and the same for my red player. Choose a method to determine first player and give them the first player token. It's got the sandworm on there. And as usual, I just start with my blue player over here on the left as first player. So that's it. Game is all set up and ready to start. So let's get with the program and get to how you play. Before we get started, I needed to mention that each of the leaders has a unique ability, or two unique abilities actually. One that can be used during play. Like for instance, Paul Atreides here, you may look at the top card of your deck at any time. And one that you can play when you play your Signet Ring card, then you can do this power, which that symbol means draw a card from your deck into your hand. But the reason I need to mention this now at the beginning is because Glossu the Beast here, he has a ability that at the start of the game, he starts with 1 spice and 1 Solari. So let's give him those. And the other guy's unique ability is when he takes a high council seat, which we'll talk about later, he gets to go up along the influence track of a faction of his choice, and if he uses his Signet Ring card, he gets a spice. So one thing they included in this that makes it easy to get started with how to play is the back of these these leader sheets. If from the ones you didn't choose, each player can flip it over. You got a good player aid there, and you can see each round has 5 phases. You got the round start, the player turns, combat, makers, and recall. So we'll start with round start. So at the beginning of a round, you'll flip over the top conflict card, and that will show the rewards that will be given to the players when you get to the combat phase. The player who wins the combat will get this reward, which, as we talked about earlier, that symbol means the winner will get to go up 1 step on the influence track of a faction of his choice, and he'll get 2 Solari. Second place winner in the combat will get 3 Solari. And in a 3-player game, the third place person doesn't get anything. If you were playing a 4-player game, the third place person would get 2 Solari. So anyway, the first thing you do in the round start phase is flip over a new conflict card. And then the next thing you do in this phase is each player will draw 5 cards into their hand. And maybe I can do this one-handed. Alright, there we go. Alright, the next phase in the round is the player turns phase. During the player turns phase, each player will get to take a turn, and on your turn you can either take an agent turn or a reveal turn. And an agent turn, you'll play a card from your hand and place one of your agent markers on a space on the board, and get the reward or whatever happens from that space on the board. And then if you run out of agents, or you just don't want to play one of your agents or can't play one of your agents, then you can take your reveal turn, which will that'll be the last thing you can do until all the other players have finished their turns for the phase. So let's start with an agent turn and see how that works. So on an agent turn, if you have an agent available on your leaderboard or leader card, you can pick a card from your hand, and you'll notice that these cards have icons here on the left hand side, and those icons represent matching icons on the board that a player can play to. So if you play this card with only this one green icon, then you can only send your agent to spaces on the board that have that green icon. So most of those are here over at the Landsrad Council. You'll see all these spaces have that green icon. So if you played that card, you could send your agent to one of those spaces if you could pay the cost of those spaces. Now on these spaces, the cost, if they have one, is listed under the icon. So it would cost 2 Solari to go to this space, 5 to go to this one, 4 to go to this one, 8 to go to this one. And then the reward for that space is shown on the right side of that space. So for instance, if you took this mentat space, again, we talked about earlier, this icon means you get to draw a card from your deck into your hand, and then you'd also get to take this mentat and place him on your leader card, and that's basically acts as an extra agent you have for that round, and at the end of the round he would go back. But anyway, so if you play a card, you have to place one of your available agents on an unoccupied space. You can't place one of your agents on a space that another player has already played on, and it has to be a space that matches the icon on your card, and one, of course, that you can afford the cost. In addition, these cards have an agent box and a reveal box. So if you play a card that has something in the agent box, like this one, after you play it or during your play of that card and taking the action, again, with this card, it would allow you to place one of your agents on one of the spaces of any of the factions, the Emperor, the Spacing Guild, Bene Gesserit, or the Fremen. So you'll see each faction has a space, and again, it may have a cost, it may not. This one has no cost and a reward of 1 water. This one has a cost of 1 water to place an agent there, and a reward of 2 troops. But anyway, the agent box, then for this one, if you played this card on your agent turn, you'll see you have to trash this card. In other words, when you trash a card, it's out of the game. So this is a card you could only play once during your agent turn, and then it's out of the game. Now, most of the cards in your starting hand don't really have anything in their agent box. One of the cards, starting cards players get that does have something in their agent box is the signet ring, which I mentioned shows the signet ring symbol. So if you play that card, that matches the symbol of one of the unique abilities on your leader. So if you play that card, first you can place one of your agents on a space with one of these symbols. So the blue is a city space. That's these spaces here are all city spaces, or the triangle is usually a combat space. You can tell the combat spaces because they have those crossed swords. There are some up here in the, I don't know how you say that, chome space here that are not combat. This one allows you to get 3 Solari. This one allows you to trade spice for Solari. But anyway, it does have that agent box that if you play a card for an agent action, you can also do what's in the agent box. And actually, I said this is usually a combat space, what it is, but actually the triangle symbol is spice trade is what that's supposed to represent. But anyway, that does represent spice trade. But like I said, most of those spaces are combat spaces, so let's talk about that for a minute. So if you played this card, you could send your agent to a space with the spice trade icon. And as I said, most of these are combat spaces except for up here in the chome or cam. I don't know how you say it. But anyway, if you did send your character to, well, actually some of these city spaces are combat spaces also, so I just want to show one that gives you a troop. So really I couldn't play this card to go there. Let me find an example. Say you played this reconnaissance card. It has the blue icon, so you could send your agent here. Has no cost. It lets you get 1 troop. Now when you take a troop like that from a card or from one of these spaces that gives you troops, it comes from your supply. Now if you're receiving a troop from a combat space or an action that a card that you went to a combat space, you can take any troops you recruit with that action and put them into the conflict. And remember, I spoke about earlier, the conflict and the combat action, combat phase later on is how you'll get these rewards. So anytime you go to a combat space and if you get any troops for that, you can, you don't have to, you could put them directly in your garrison, or you could put them into the conflict, meaning they're going to take part in the battle in the combat phase. And also, when you put a figure in the combat space, you can take up to 2 troops out of your garrison and also add them to the conflict. Only troops that you have in the conflict area are going to take place in the combat. So any troops that are left in your garrison when you get to the combat phase, they won't take part. So the only way you can get troops into the conflict for that round is to place your agent on a combat space, and then again, that lets you, any troops that you collect from that, like I got 1 troop here, then I would also get to draw a card into my hand from my deck. Or if you went to this space, it would let you recruit 2 troops. Again, remember, those come from your supply. You could put them into your garrison, or because that's a combat space, you could put it directly into the conflict for this round. And you can always, whenever you've taken a combat space, you can move 2 troops from your garrison, if you have them, into the conflict. So that's how you get troops into the conflict. You'll notice some of these spaces have these control flags. While some conflict cards, they'll show an icon like this on it, this flag. And so if you've won that conflict, then you get to place one of your control flags in the area. It'll say here on the side, what area it's related to. So it might say something in Imperial Basin. So if you end up winning that conflict in the conflict phase, you would get to put one of your control flags in the Imperial Basin. Then anytime somebody places a agent there, you get this reward. So if you had your control flag here and somebody placed an agent in here on their turn, you would get 1 spice. Also, if a conflict card is revealed that's going to take place in the Imperial Basin, you automatically get to put 1 troop from your supply into the conflict. Anytime you play a card that lets you put an agent on one of the factions, like this one, you could choose a faction, one of the factions, Fremen, Bene Gesserit, Spacing Guild, or Emperor, and if you place your agent on, you choose one of those, place your agent on a space that you can occupy. So again, if you chose this one, you'd get a reward of 1 water. But anytime you place your agent in one of these faction spaces, you get to move up on the influence track with that faction. So if blue player played here, he would get to move 1 space up on the influence track with this faction. When you get to the 2nd space on the influence track of a faction, that gives you a victory point. Anytime you see one of these symbols, that's a victory point. So when you get to the 2nd space on the influence track of a faction, that gives you a victory point, lets you move up on the victory point track. If you ended up somehow getting a card that dropped you back below the 2nd space, you have to give that victory point back. Once you reach the 4th space of an influence track, you get the bonus shown here. So like this one would give you a water, this one would give you an intrigue card, this one would give you 3 Solari, and this one gives you 2 troops. Going back real quick, if you get troops from a space that is not a combat space, like this, or this, or this, those troops can only go into your garrison. They go from your supply into your garrison. That does not allow you to put them in the conflict. The only time you can put troops in the conflict is when you go to a combat space. But back to the influence track. So once you reach the 4th space of an on the influence track with a faction, you can also take the faction mark. You get the bonus shown. You can also take the faction marker there, which means you now have an alliance with that faction, and you get an extra victory point. Now, if somebody later moves higher up on the track than you are, then you have to give them the alliance token, and they gain a victory point and you lose a victory point. You never have to give back the bonus you got for reaching. Even if you drop back below here, you wouldn't have to give that bonus back. But so that's why it's maybe best to get to the top of the alliance track or the influence track, because then even if somebody, and if you've got that faction marker, because then even if somebody reaches the same height as you, they didn't pass you, so you wouldn't have to give them the faction token, thereby giving them the alliance. And having an alliance with a faction, some cards and such, to get a special benefit, they require you to have an alliance with a faction, so that's why it's good to have the alliance token. And of course, moving up on these tracks and getting these alliance tokens is a good way to get a lot of victory points, because you can get one for each faction, or for the second space, and another one for getting that token, so that's a good source of victory points. One of the win conditions when you get to the recall phase, which is the last phase of a round, is to have 10 or more victory points, and that's another in-game trigger. Remember I mentioned if you've played around with the last combat card or conflict card in the deck, that's an in-game trigger. Somebody having 10 or more victory points when you get to the recall phase, that's an in-game trigger. Alright, you'll notice some of these spaces have this symbol here, which means you get to draw an intrigue card. So if you went to this space, you'd get to recruit a troop, and because it's a combat space, you could put it into the conflict if you want. But you'd also get an intrigue card. So let's talk about intrigue cards. Intrigue cards can come in 3 varieties. You can have a plot, combat, or endgame. So a plot in-game or intrigue card you can play on your turn anytime you're taking an agent action or a reveal action. We haven't talked about reveal actions yet, but we will. You can play a plot card, so like this one would just give you 2 Solari. This one would let you go up 1 space on the influence track with the Emperor faction. The other kind of intrigue card you have is a combat intrigue card, and you play those when you're doing the combat phase. And you could play this one to get more strength, or retreat up to 3 of your troops. And the final kind of intrigue card is an in-game intrigue card, and it's a way for you to get bonus points once the in-game is triggered and you're scoring. So for this one, if you have at least 2 the spice must flow cards, which are these cards up here we set up at the start of the game. If you have at least 2 of those, you get an extra victory point. If you have more spice must flow than each opponent, you get another victory point. So anyway, you've got your in-game, combat, and plot intrigue cards. So they come in handy. So we've talked about the agent turns, where you play a card, choose a board space with a matching agent icon, and send the agent there. Pay any cost, earn the rewards, and use effects on the space. And the card's agent box. And you get to do those in the order you choose. Use the agent box or the effect from the space, however. Just having a little Alexa interruption there. But let's see what else. If it's a faction space, move your cube 1 space up. If it's a combat space, you may deploy troops recruited plus up to 2 from your garrison. So we've talked about that. So next, let's talk about a reveal turn. So after you've taken all your agent, first you took an agent turn, then the next player, then the next player, then you took your second agent turn. So you don't have any more agents left on your board, but you still have cards in your hand. So then you can take your reveal turn, and that'll be the last turn you're allowed to take during the round. So in a reveal turn, you will, well, let's just say these are the cards you played during your agent turn. Now, of course, this one would be out of the game because it would be trashed. Your other one would be there. So then you put the cards you're just revealing during your reveal turn kind of next to your played cards, but not right next to them, so you can keep them separate. Well, you'll earn whatever effects are down here in the reveal boxes. Remember, these are the agent boxes on the top. Down here in the bottom are your reveal boxes. So these in the blue diamonds, those are persuasion, and that's what you'll use to spend to buy new cards. So at the end of this turn, I would have 3 total persuasion. Well, the cards available to buy are up here in the Imperium row, and the cost in persuasion can be seen here. Then you also have your reserve cards, which also are available to purchase, and their cost is here. Now, the fold space card, the only way to acquire that is to, on one of your agent turns, place an agent in this box, and then that gives you a fold space card. You can't buy that with persuasion. But as we talked about here, I would have 3 persuasion. So I could buy one of these that just costs 3, and when you purchase a card, say if I bought this one, it goes into your discard pile. It doesn't go into your draw pile or into your hand. It goes into your discard pile, and then you immediately replace it with a new card. So if you were going to buy 2 cards, say if you had 3 persuasion and you had these cards out, you could buy 1 for 2 and 1 for 1. But when you buy the 1 for 2, before you buy the 1 for 1, you can flip over a new one, because as soon as you buy one, you replace it, in case there's something else comes up that you wanted to get. But in this case, I couldn't afford that, so then I could get the 1 for 1 here, and both of those would go in my discard pile. So you can buy as many cards as you can afford. And then, of course, any cards in your discard pile, your new ones, and any that you'll discard in the cleanup portion of this phase, will get, when you don't have any more cards in your draw deck and you need to draw more cards, then you shuffle your discard pile and form a new draw deck. So like any deck builder, that's how new cards get added into your hand and available to you. So after you've spent your persuasion, earned any rewards down here in your reveal boxes, then you'll set your combat strength for the round. So when you set your combat strength, let's say during the agent turns that the players put these troops into the conflict area. So it's Blue's reveal turn. He's going to set his combat strength now. He's already spent his influence or his persuasion on cards. Now he's going to set his combat strength. Well, you get 2 strength for each cube you have, and that's listed here. So he would get 6 strength. And then, because he had a sword here on his reveal box for one of the cards he revealed, he gets an extra point. You'll see for each sword you get an extra point. So his combat strength would be set at 7. So once you set your combat strength, then you clean up. You get all the cards you revealed, all the cards you played for the round, and those go into your discard pile. So now you've passed for the rest of the round. So if the other players still have agents they can spend to take agent turns, they can continue to do that until they take their reveal turns. Once everybody's taken their reveal turn, then you go to the combat phase. So once you get to the combat phase, everybody will have set their strength in their reveal turn. Well, then you get to the combat phase, and each player, starting with the first player, can decide whether or not they want to play a combat intrigue card. So let's say, Paul Atreides here, he has, and actually you can play as many combat intrigue cards as you have. So he has this one, but he decides, since right now he's already ahead, he doesn't need to play it, so he's going to keep it. So then it goes to the next player. Old Earl Memnon Thorvald here. Well, he doesn't have any combat intrigue cards, so there's nothing he could do. And I'll gloss through the beast. He happens to have a combat intrigue card, which is going to give him 2 points. So he plays that. Now you could play it to increase your strength, in the combat, or just get 10 spice in the end game. So he could keep that for the end game to get 10 spice, or he could play that during combat to increase his combat strength. So we'll just say he played it for that. Now, it comes back to Paul. Even though he passed the first time, he could still play another this combat card if he wanted to, because you can continue to play combat cards until all players have passed consecutively. Then once all players have passed consecutively, then no more combat intrigue cards can be played. But in this case, he wouldn't need to play that because he's still in the lead in strength. So he would just say he's not going to play one. Everyone else, they don't have any more intrigue cards, so they pass. So everybody decides to pass. That ends the combat. So blue player here would win the combat. So they would get the first place prize and get to choose a faction of their choice and move up one on the influence track and get 2 Solari. Second place went to the red player, so he would get 3 Solari. And because this is only a 3-player game, nobody gets the third place prize. Then any troops you did have in the conflict, they are removed and go back into your pool. They don't go back to your garrison. They go into your pool, so they won't be available, to be placed into the conflict the next round. And then you move all the markers back to the 0 space. So we talked about the reveal turn. You reveal cards from your hand, earn rewards, and use effects in the reveal boxes. Set your combat strength. Clean up, which is just putting your cards in your discard pile. Talked about combat, where you play combat intrigue cards, resolve combat and grant rewards, and then return your troops to the player's supply. Next you go to the makers. So the makers are these spaces that show the sandworm here on these desert spaces. And if no agent was placed on one of those spaces during the round, you add a spice to those spots with the sandworm. Now, if somebody had placed an agent on that space during the round, that agent would still be there. You wouldn't add an additional spice. But as the rounds go on, if nobody's been on that space, you start to accumulate more spice. And whenever you go to one of these spaces, you get the base amount of spice here, plus you get whatever is accumulated there. So that's the makers, and next you go to the recall, which is the last phase of the round. Check for in-game, which I already talked about. If somebody has 10 victory point, has reached the 10 victory points, that triggers the in-game. Or if you've played the last conflict card, there's no more conflict cards, then that triggers the in-game. So once you reach the end-game, if somebody had 10 or more victory points, or you've played the last combat card in the pile, if anybody has end-of-game intrigue cards, they play those, and then once all those are played, whoever has the highest score is the winner. If it happens to be tied for highest score at that point, then the tiebreakers are whoever has the most spice. If that's still a tie, then it's whoever has the most Solari. If that's still a tie, then whoever has the most water. And finally, if that's still a tie, it's whoever has the most troops in their garrison. But if you haven't triggered the end game, Lord, those parakeets are driving me crazy. Anyway, if you haven't reached the end game, then the next thing you do in the recall phase is return the mentat. So if somebody had acquired the mentat by some means and used it as an agent, or still had it on their mat and never did use it, you would return the agent. Now, there's some conflict rewards that actually give you the mentat for a conflict reward. So if you got the mentat for a conflict reward, then during this recall phase you would not return the mentat. You would actually get to keep it so you could use it for the next round. But otherwise, you return the mentat to his space there. Then all the players recall all the agents they sent out this round. Now, normally you start out, like I said, you start out with 2. You can acquire another agent. Remember at the beginning of the game we set out your swordmaster, and I said if you take this space and pay 8 Solari, then you get to acquire your swordmaster, and then he goes on your mat, and then you can immediately use him that round, and from then on you have 3 agents after you've acquired him. He doesn't go back. That'll be a 3rd agent for you always. The only one that ever goes back is if you get that mentat. And then the last thing you do in the recall phase is pass the first player marker to the right or clockwise, and then you'll start the next round with revealing a new conflict card and drawing a hand of 5 cards. And as I said, if your draw deck runs out, then you shuffle your discard piles and continue to draw up to the number, to your 5-card hand. So that's basically how you play. You continue playing around. Again, because of the conflict deck, as you're limited to 10 rounds. It could end earlier if somebody gets to 10 victory points prior to the end of the 10th round. There is on the back of the rules, there's a symbology icon guide, because there is a lot of icons on this board that you may not know what they are, but this on the back of the manual pretty much tells what they all are, and within a few minutes you've learned them all really. And then there's this little board space guide that also comes with the game that explains what each space on the board is and what it does. So, it shows like a raccoon is a city. The ones with the blue circles are city. It's a combat space. You can recruit a troop and draw a card. And a raccoon's controller gains. Remember I talked about you can gain control, gains a Solari. So this sheet explains each space on the board. I'm not going to go through every one of them, but we will now go through a few turns just to see how the game plays, and then we'll wrap it up. Alright, I've got everything set back up like it was at the beginning. So the first thing is draw a conflict, reveal a new conflict card. We'll just use the one we had out there, so we would reveal that. And each player is going to draw a hand of 5 cards. Let me do that off camera. Alright, Paul Atreides here is the first player. He's drawn his hand of 5 cards. And remember, again, all the players start with the same 10 cards. They may not have the exact same beginning hand because they've shuffled their 10 cards and they're only drawing 5. But they're all going to basically have the same cards until people have bought cards during their reveal stage, and then the decks begin to differ. Like any deck builder, I'm sure most of you guys know all that. But anyway, so Paul, he's going to take an agent turn. So he's going to go ahead and play this Seek Allies, which he'll have to trash the card as we talked about. But that allows him to put an agent on any one of the factions. So we'll just say he's going to go here with the Bene Gesserit. It costs nothing to put a agent there, and he draws a intrigue card. So we'll see what he gets. He got a combat card. Keep that hidden face down. Now he would also if any player has 4 or more intrigue cards, then they have to give you one at random. But as this is the beginning of the game, nobody's going to have 4 more intrigue cards. Alright, so that is now this, because it says trash the card, this is now out of the game. It won't go into his discard pile. So now we go to the next player in clockwise order. That's old Earl Memnon Thorvald here. So we'll just say he's going to play, it's kind of hard for me to keep, he's going to play reconnaissance. So he's going to take one of his agent. He'll go here, Eric Keen. That's going to let him get a troop from his supply, and he will go ahead and add that to the conflict, and he'll take 2 more troops and add them in the conflict. Remember, you can do that whenever you do go to the combat space. And he also gets to draw a card from his deck into his hand, so he'll draw one into his hand, and that will end his card. Now the one card he played stays up here. He's got his hand of cards here. Of course your hand will be hidden from the other players, but just the way I have to play, I can't do that. Alright, so now we go to the next player. Let's see what he's got. We'll say, now if a card doesn't have an icon on it, like this one, that can only be played during the reveal, a reveal turn. It can't be played during an agent turn. So we'll say he's going to play Dagger, which has one of the lands red agent icons, so he'll take one of his agent. And the only one he can play on is this one that doesn't have a cost, because he doesn't have any Solari for the other ones. But that lets him recruit a troop, but because it's not a combat space, he'll take it from his supply, but it has to go into his garrison. He didn't do a combat space, so he can't put anything in the conflict. But it also gives him 1 persuasion at the end of the round when he's doing his reveal phase and he's purchasing cards. He has to remember that he has 1 extra persuasion. The other space like that is here, the High Council. And if you remember, when we set up at the beginning of the game, you have an extra round token here. Well, if you ever take this High Council space, you get to put that in here as a seat on the High Council, and then you'll always have 2 extra persuasion points to spend at the during your reveal phase. You can only take that once per game, and obviously because there's only 4 spaces and you've only got 1 extra token. But of course it costs 5 Solari to take that. Anyway, he's going to go here. He got his 1 troop in his garrison, and he'll remember he's got 1 extra persuasion. Well, we'll say old Paul Atreides here. He wants to get in on this conflict because he wants some of these rewards too. So he's going to play his reconnaissance, and so he'll send his last agent to a blue city space. So he'll send it here to Carthag. That will give him a troop and an intrigue card. So he gets a troop from his supply. He can put it into the conflict, and because he did a combat space, he can add up to 2 from his garrison, which he'll do. And then he also gets to draw an intrigue card. Remember, he got one before, so now he has 2, a combat intrigue card and a plot intrigue card. Now he could actually play this because it's still during his turn, but he'll hold on to that for now. Alright, we're back to old Earl Memnon Thorvald. He's going to play his diplomacy card, which allows him to play his last agent to one of the factions. And he's going to play his to the Spacing Guild, Fold Space, so that allows him to get a Fold Space card from up here, and that immediately goes into his discard pile. And that card allows you to do is play pretty much to any space, any of the factions or any of the spaces, and then you get to draw a card from your deck, but then that card is trashed, it's out of the game. But because he played in this space, he also gets to go up 1 space on the Spacing Guild influence track. Well, old Glossu here, he wants to get in on this combat too, because he doesn't want to be left out. So what he's going to do, he's going to play his diplomacy card, and then he's going to play his last agent here into the Fremen faction here. It does cost him 1 water, which is all he's got, 1 water, so he's got to spend that. But that is a combat space, so he gets to get 2 troops from his supply, and because it's a combat space, they can go directly into the conflict, and because it's a combat space, he can send up to 2 troops from his garrison into the conflict. So now he's actually got more troops than everybody else. And because he went to a Fremen faction space, he gets to go up 1 on their influence track. Alright, we're back to old Paul Atreides here. I guess that's that actor that played that king in that Netflix movie, Henry. Was he Henry V or something? Anyway, that's all I think of when I see that. Anyway, so he has no more agents, so he can't do an agent turn. So the only thing he can do now is his reveal turn. So he's got 3 cards left in his hand, which he's going to reveal. That's going to give him 3 persuasion that he can spend. So he thinks he's going to... Now he could spend up to 3, but this will only cost 2. It doesn't get... If you don't spend all of it, then you just lose what's up. But there's no more cards there that cost 1, so he's just going to get this one. Goes in his discard pile. But in its agent icon, whenever he plays this, because in the agent box, that'll give him a troop whenever he plays that, whenever he gets it into his hand. But anyway, he drew that. That goes into his discard pile. Now remember, he has to immediately replace it with another one. And that's all he has in persuasion to spend. But he does have to set his combat strength now. So he's got blue, he's got 3 in there at 2 points each. That's 6. Plus, he got 1 sword on his reveal action there. Any sword that you had in cards you played during agent action or any persuasion, those do not count. It's only cards you play during your reveal turn. So he gets 1 more strength because of that. So his strength is now set at 7. Now he does cleanup. So he takes all the cards played and revealed that round and puts them in his discard pile. Alright, same pretty much with Earl Memnon. He doesn't have any more agents, so he's got to reveal his remaining cards. Remember, he has an extra because he drew 1 for one of the actions he took. So he actually has 2, 3, 4, 5 persuasion he can spend. So he could get a 3 and a 2, or he could get a 5, or he could get a 4 and a 1. And we'll say he's going to do that. He's going to get this 4. He puts that in his discard pile. Now, before he decides what to buy, he has to reveal another one. Alright, so he still has 1 more point left over, so he'll get this 1 point. Put that in his discard pile. And then flip over a new one. And then he sets his combat strength. And he's got 6 also. And he also got 1 extra strength from his revealed card, so he's also at 7. And these, now he does a cleanup phase, so these with these that he played go into his discard pile. And finally, last, we come to House Harkonnen. He also has no more agents, so he has to do his reveal phase. Now, you can do your reveal phase even if you have agents. You can just say, all right, I'm going to go ahead and do my reveal turn and just not use your last agent. If you have cards that you want to spend during your reveal turn instead of spending them to send an agent, you can do that. But again, remember, once you've done your reveal turn, even if you have agents left, you won't be able to use them this round. So anyway, he reveals, he has 3 persuasion to spend. So we'll just say he decides to get, one of these for 2. And he puts that in his discard pile. And he has 1 left over, but there's no cards to buy for 1. Now he sets his strength. He has 4, so that's 8. Plus, he did have 1 that he revealed, so that gives him 9. And he does the cleanup phase. Sorry, I'm kind of cramped for room here, so he puts his cards in his discard pile. And now we go to the combat phase. So starting with the first player, he can play any intrigue combat cards. So remember old Paul Atreides, he did have 1 here. He got this master tactician, so he can add 3 strength or retreat 3 of his troops. So if he thought, well, even with 3 strength I can't win, so I could just retreat those 3 troops back into my garrison. But he thinks he's going to play it, so he discards that intrigue card, and he increases his strength by 3. 1, 2, 3, so he's at 10. Memnon doesn't have any intrigue cards, and Glossu the Beast Raban doesn't have any intrigue cards, so that's going to end the combat. So Paul Atreides won, so he would get the first reward where he would get to go up 1 on any faction influence track. So just say he actually looks like he played here. He should have gone up 1. I don't know why I thought I did that, but anyway, so this would be a good idea. So now he'll go up 1 again here, which moves him to the 2nd space, so he actually gets a victory point, and he gets 2 Solari. Then 2nd place was green, so green would get 3 Solari. 1, 2, 3. The big ones here are 5, just like with the spice. The other ones are 1. So green gets his 3 Solari, and 3rd place gets nothing. In a 4-player game, 3rd place would get the 2 Solari. So then all these troops that were spent in the conflict, they go back to the player's supply, not back to their garrison. And then these combat strength markers go back to 0. Alright, now we go to the makers phase. Nobody placed an agent on any of these spaces, so 1 extra spice goes on each of those. And finally we go to the recall phase, check for in-game. Obviously the game isn't over after the first turn. Return the mentat, nobody got that. Recall agents, so players take their agents back to their board. And we pass the first player marker, so that would come over here to Memnon. And then he would start the next round by revealing the next combat card. And then everybody would draw 5 cards into their hand. And that's pretty much how a round goes. I think that gives you a good idea of how the game plays. I think we covered most of the spaces, most of the icons, how they work. Again, this one, if you go here, you can take one of the, you can only do one of these. You can either trade 2 spice for 6 Solari or 3 spice for 8 Solari. Anyway, that's a good way to trade spice for Solari. Like I said, this is the space you go to get your swordmaster, get you an extra agent. This is the space you go to get 2 extra. Oh, and we forgot when old Green was buying cards, he had that extra point. You got to remember that. Sometimes, you know, I played this once by myself yesterday, and it was kind of hard to remember to use the points up here. But anyway, that I think we've covered a lot of the spaces. You know, here if you spend go here and spend 6 spice, you get 5 troops, and it's a combat space, so you could put them directly into the conflict, and you also get 2 water. And then some of these spaces cost water to go to. This one, you have to have at least 2 influence with the Fremen to put anybody in this space. So, you know, that's how it goes. And when you're playing these cards, again, we talked about you get whatever effect is in. If you play it for an agent turn, you would get the effect in this agent box. If you play it for a revealed turn, you get the effect in the reveal box. That covers it, I think. Should give you a pretty good idea of how the game plays. So let me just tell you what I think about it. So as I said at the beginning of the video, a lot of people were ranting and raving about this game, had it in their top hundreds or top 25s or whatever. Of course, I've only played it once yesterday, played it by myself, just as 3 players, and I liked it, but you know, kind of felt like saying, what's all the hubbub, bub? I just didn't get what everybody thought was so great about it. I mean, it's fine, it's a fine game, and as I always say, when I played a game only by myself and not with other players, I really can't make a statement on how good it is, because a game is always, at least to me, a game is always more fun when you've played it with other players. But just the general feel I get from this is kind of the same kind of general feel I got from Terraforming Mars. I know many people love that game and think it's great, but I got it, played it once by myself, played it once against another player, opponents, and I actually won that game, but it just didn't grab me, so I ended up selling it. Um, so I wonder if this game is kind of the same to me. I mean, I thought it was fine, but I just didn't see what all the fuss was about. Everybody raving about it, but I certainly won't make a final opinion on it for myself until I've at least played it with other players and make a decision. But just as an example, last week I actually had my first gathering of friends to play, to have a gaming weekend, and we played Quest for El Dorado. We played Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea. We played Star Trek Ascendancy, and we played Crusader Kings. The only game out of those four that I would rather play this than one of those four would be Quest for El Dorado. I like this better than Quest for El Dorado, but just from the one play I've had of this, I would rather play any of those three other games. But again, that's an opinion based on one play and only playing by myself. I think one of the things is I just didn't really get. I mean, I don't know a lot about the Dune universe anyway, but when I was playing this, I didn't feel like I was immersed in the Dune universe. When I'm playing Star Trek Ascendancy, I feel immersed in the Star Trek universe, and in this, I just felt like, okay, I'm playing this card with this symbol to go on a space with this symbol and get these cubes. So I don't know. Again, that's my opinion. Like I said, a lot of people love this game, and maybe I'll like it more when I play it against somebody. So we'll see. But that's my thoughts on it after one play. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.